August 9th, 1965. A man sits in front of a television camera. He is 41 years old. He is usually composed, a brilliant lawyer, a street fighter in politics. But today, he breaks down. He cannot speak. He takes a handkerchief and wipes away tears. This is Lee Kuan Yew, and he has just received the worst news of his life. His country, Singapore, has not been granted independence. It has been expelled. It has been kicked out of the Federation of Malaysia. In the history of the modern world, this moment is unique. Most nations fight for their freedom. They bleed for independence. Singapore is the only country in modern history to have independence forced upon it. At that moment, nobody believed this island would survive. Not the British, not the Malaysians, and honestly, not even Lee Kuan Yew. It was a tiny island with no natural resources, no coal, no oil, no gold. It didn't even have its own drinking water. That had to be piped in from the very neighbor that just kicked them out. It was a swampy, mosquito-infested colonial outpost with a deep-water port, yes, but surrounded by larger, potentially hostile neighbors. It was a third-world slum with first-world dreams, and the clock was ticking. To understand the miracle of Singapore from 1960 to 2026, you have to understand the sheer desperation of that beginning. This isn't just a story about economics, it is a story about the psychology of survival. In the 1960s, Singapore was volatile. The streets were often filled with racial riots between the Chinese and Malay populations. Unemployment was skyrocketing. The British Empire, which had provided security and jobs for over a century, announced they were withdrawing their military east of Suez. This was a death sentence. The British military bases contributed to 20% of Singapore's economy. When they left, 30,000 jobs would vanish overnight. Lee Kuan Yew and his team, the founding fathers, faced a brutal reality. How do you build a nation from nothing? Their strategy was radical. While other developing nations in the 1960s and 70s were closing their doors, becoming protectionist, and chanting anti-Western slogans, Singapore did the opposite. They leaped over their neighbors and connected directly with the developed world. They marketed Singapore as a stable base for the West. They invited the multinational corporations. They essentially told the Americans, the Japanese, and the Europeans, "Come here. We will give you tax breaks. We will give you a disciplined workforce. We will speak English. We will be safer than New York and cleaner than London." It was a gamble, but it worked. Texas Instruments arrived. Hewlett-Packard followed. Factories replaced swamps. The manufacturing sector exploded. But economic growth wasn't enough. Lee Kuan Yew knew that a nation of immigrants divided by race and religion could tear itself apart. He needed to engineer a society. This is where the story gets controversial but historically fascinating. The government implemented policies that were unheard of. They didn't just build housing, they engineered social integration. The Housing Development Board, or HDB, built massive high-rise apartments. But here's the catch: they implemented ethnic quotas. Every block, every neighborhood had to reflect the national racial percentages. A Chinese family had to live next to a Malay family who lived next to an Indian family. It forced integration. It prevented racial ghettos from forming. It created peace through policy. They tackled corruption with a ruthlessness that shocked the region. In a part of the world where greasing palms was the norm, Singapore made corruption a high-risk, low-reward activity. They paid their civil servants market-competitive salaries to remove the temptation of bribes, and they jailed anyone, regardless of status, who crossed the line. This created trust, and in the world of global finance, trust is the most valuable currency. By the 1980s and 90s, Singapore had transformed. It was one of the Asian tigers. The skyline began to rise. Changi Airport opened in 1981, not just as a transport hub, but as a statement of intent, a declaration that this tiny dot was the center of the world. The port became the busiest in the world. They moved from making textiles to making hard drives, then to wafers, then to biotechnology and finance. But this rapid ascent came with a label. Critics called it a nanny state. They mocked the bans on chewing gum, the heavy fines for littering, the strict media controls. Lee Kuan Yew's response was unapologetic. He believed that in a developing society, order was more important than unfettered liberty. He argued that you cannot eat democracy. He traded certain civil liberties for security, prosperity, and efficiency. Whether you agree with him or not, the results were undeniable. Singapore went from a per capita GDP of around $500 in 1965 to one of the highest in the world today, surpassing its former colonizer, Great Britain. As the new millennium approached, Singapore faced a new challenge, the transition of power. Lee Kuan Yew stepped down as prime minister in 1990, but his shadow loomed large. The leadership transitioned to Goh Chok Tong and then to Lee's eldest son, Lee Hsien Loong, in 2004. The challenge for modern Singapore was to prove it wasn't just a one-man show. They survived the 1997 Asian financial crisis. They navigated the 2008 global financial crash better than most Western nations. They turned a city of concrete into a city in a garden, realizing that to attract the world's best talent, the city had to be livable, beautiful, and sustainable. They began recycling water, turning sewage into ultra-clean drinking water called N-water, solving the very existential crisis that terrified them in 1965. Then came 2015, the end of an era. Lee Kuan Yew passed away. For a week, the nation stood still. Hundreds of thousands of people stood in torrential rain to pay their respects. It was a moment of national solidification. The fear that Singapore would collapse without its founder proved unfounded. The institutions he built were stronger than the man himself. Now, as we look at the timeline from 2020 through 2026, Singapore faces a totally different landscape. The era of easy globalization is ending. The world is fracturing. The geopolitical tension between the United States and China places Singapore in an incredibly precarious position. It relies on the US for security and China for trade. It is the mouse dancing between two elephants. The leadership transition continues. Lee Hsien Loong has handed over the reins to the 4G leadership, led by Lawrence Wong. This political succession, formalized around 2024 and 2025, marks the first time Singapore is led by a generation that was born after independence, a generation that does not remember the riots or the swamps. Their challenge is different. It isn't about survival anymore. It's about identity, inequality, and relevance in a digital, AI-driven world. By 2026, Singapore aims to be the Silicon Valley of Asia. It is investing billions into artificial intelligence, sustainable energy, and automated ports. The Tuas Megaport, currently under construction, will be the largest fully automated terminal in the world. They are future-proofing a country that, by all laws of nature, shouldn't even exist. From a crying leader in 1965 to a global financial fortress in 2026, the story of Singapore is a lesson in pragmatism. It teaches us that geography is not destiny. It shows that with ruthless efficiency, zero tolerance for corruption, and a clear long-term vision, a small island with no resources can punch far above its weight. It is an unlikely nation that turned its vulnerability into its greatest strength. The world is changing fast. The next 50 years will be harder than the last. But if history is any indicator, Singapore doesn't just adapt to the future, it rushes to meet it. If you found this deep dive into history fascinating, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. We have more stories of nations that defied the odds coming up. Thanks for watching.